Hello, welcome to our very first episode of DM-in-Law. My name is Tori, and this is my brother-in-law and fellow forever DM, Cody.
Hello.
There he is. So we are just a couple of, like I said, forever DMs, but we're also siblings-in-law, and we love the game Dungeons & Dragons so much, and we just really wanted to, share our love of the game with people, but also, give tips, give advice, all the things that we didn't really have when we were getting into the game. I know, Cody, you've been playing for a very long time. I can't wait to explore your journey of, learning this game. But for me, I've been playing this maybe for about 7 years now, and it's I am still learning new things all the time, whether I'm discovering it on my own or, learning from, professional DMs who do, actual plays and all that stuff. But yeah, all that to say, guys, I think this would be a wonderful space to, let you know you guys are not alone if you want to learn how to DM or run a game of Dungeons and Dragons, because this game is really fun.
I think this is a bit of a golden age. Even you starting 7 years ago, things like Critical Role, YouTube were still around. It still kind of baffles my mind that you didn't spend your intro to D&D just huddled around 3 books trying to figure it out. You could just Google a question or
yeah. I had internet. I had a million websites. I had way too many websites, but the resources that I had, crazy when I compare them to you with your 3 little books.
Yeah, I've been playing for 20 years. Back when I was 13, so 2004-ish. And I started with it's funny because we're only on 5th edition, but I started it was called 3.5. It actually is even on the books, which is kind of funny because with this new transition, I kind of thought they might do the same thing with 5th edition, but it's not the case. But yeah, I started with edition 3, I guess, but the updated rule set, which is called 3.5, and that was a monster. I think I showed you the books before, Tori, and it is on record in some capacity as having the most amount of text crammed per page. I look at my old book and I look at the new 5th edition, and man, 5e reads so much better.
Which is kind of crazy because when you really think about Dungeons and Dragons, this game is so popular, but there's so many rules to follow. There's a lot to learn, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. But I just think it's crazy that you've been playing for so long and you didn't have any of these resources. But how did you? So you started playing in 2004. How did you get into it though? Did you where'd you get your stuff from?
So I had D&D kind of dropped into my lap. I didn't seek it out. I didn't even know what it was. My next door neighbor was doing some spring cleaning, and we got a knock on our door, and she had this old cardboard box, and she basically was just like, "Hey, I'm getting rid of these old books." And I being at that age, I was a bit of a bookworm, so I was always in the backyard reading or on the front porch. So my neighbor had just kind of seen that I was a book person, and she's like, "I think Cody would like these." And yeah, she gives me these books, and I got I'm trying to remember now, it's been so long, but I got the 2nd edition, so Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I got the Dungeon Master Guide. I got the first 3 monster manuals, because they used to be called the monster compendiums back then. And then there were these so those were the hardcover books, but then they also had released supplements and other things that were magazine quality, a little bit higher quality, but they were the floppy plastic covers.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was over the summer, and I just read the crap out of that stuff. I didn't really understand it, but I loved the art. I loved the idea behind it. And I didn't even realize that I was missing key components like a player's handbook. And we had a local hobby store, so one day I just kind of rode my bike up there and asked some questions, and she was like, "Oh, this is the newest version," showed me kind of the 3 staples that make up, at least in my mind, D&D, which is, player's handbook, monster manual, dungeon master guide. And my 14th birthday was fast approaching, so it was kind of a no-brainer gift for me. I mean, super expensive though. It was still $50 a book even back then.
Oof, that's even more expensive than now. If you take into account all the inflation and stuff, that's kind of crazy.
Absolutely, yeah. It's right. I think I just picked up the new player's handbook for $54.99. So yeah, not much inflation over these last 20 years.
That's crazy. I think if you were to take into account the inflation, $50 20 years ago, that would have been odd, probably close to $75-$80 worth.
Yeah, and then you have to factor in my first set of dice, because I got that as part of my gift. Yeah, I don't know how my parents afforded that. I'm going to be honest with you, because that was a pretty expensive 14th birthday present.
My gosh, but you know what? Well worth it. But that's kind of cute though. Like a little tiny child Cody just like being casually gifted this magical book. I did not have such a magical experience. I had a coworker who really really wanted to like, have a campaign with a bunch of coworkers, and like I had like my partner at the time was playing a game. Like they had their own campaign that they were in. They were asking if I'd be interested, and I was like, "Nah, I don't know if it's my thing. I don't know if I want to try it." And then I kind of just jumped on the bandwagon because, my coworkers were doing it, and I was like, "Sure, why not?" And then the first game was okay. I think we just were really confused about what to do. Our
Yep.
dungeon master tried to like give us options for things. Like everything was just very awkward. And then but we pushed through. Like we got past the awkward stage. We started getting to know our characters a little bit more. And then I think it wasn't until one of my friends who was also in this campaign, she had started watching, a live play series. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, this is really good. There's like professional voice actors who are playing Dungeons and Dragons together. They started out doing a home game." And I was like, "What do you mean, like voice actors?" She's like, "Professional voice actors, like in the industry." And I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "It's called Critical Role, and it's so cool." She kept trying to like get me on Critical Role for like the longest time. We were still playing our game, and I was like, "Okay, I guess I kind of like D&D." And then everything changed. We went to Me and this friend, and then one other person from our campaign. The three of us went to New York City together. And it wasn't until I think it was a rainy day. We were staying in at our Airbnb, and then we were like, "Okay, well, what do we do?" And she decided to play episode 46 or 47 of campaign 2, which had like a guest star on the show. And I was enamored. I was like, "This is magical." Like, what? I thus started, right as soon as we were on our flight home, I started episode 1 of campaign 2. And I think I want to say within a year, I had caught up. Yeah, that sounds, no, less actually. I think it was within 9 months I was caught up, because that was June
Jeez.
2019. And then I was caught up by the time COVID started in March 2020.
It makes me feel, in a way, a little older, because like I remember it's funny that you're telling me you started in like episode 46 of season 2, because I got into Critical Role. Um, I don't even know the episode, but just to kind of timestamp where we are, I guess, in the world right now for this podcast, pretty much where season 3 of Vox Machina is picking up right now, the Amazon series, is pretty much where I jumped right in. And then I kind of had this weird thing where I would watch the new episode, and then during the week waiting for the new episode, I started at like, I think, because it didn't start at episode 1, it started on like episode 13 or something. And I was like, okay, I'll watch the new episode on Thursday, and then I'll watch like 4 or 5 episodes throughout the week, and I slowly filled in the gap, and it gave me a lot of more courage to be more expressive, and like you said, more role play, because I feel like as new players, especially if no one has that exposure, like I didn't know how to role play. I didn't really understand.
Well, because like there's such a taboo around the term role play for Dungeons and Dragons, and like tabletop RPGs came back into the fold of things. You hear the words, like most people, you hear the word role play and you're like, "Nope, this is some weird sort of kink. I'm not about that." But
Yeah, kind of.
yeah, well, that was the thing. That was the taboo. Like nobody wanted to involve themselves with it like publicly. Aside from like the whole point of view that Dungeons and Dragons is for nerds, like people hear the term roleplay and they're like, "Oh my god, no, absolutely not." But like now there's so many different styles to play, and I love that. But yeah, Critical Role plus having people at a table, who were also falling in love with the game, like that was it for me. Once we all started really falling in love with the game together that we were making, that we were playing together, like I don't know, there was just something magical that kind of clicked. And it was like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, like a switch was turned on, and you're like, "Oh my god, this is the best thing ever." And I've seen it happen with other people too, and I love that moment.
Like one of our neighbors also played, and like it was just the three of us, like 2 players and a DM, and like we did this whole like this was back when like Underworld was big, the whole vampire werewolf thing. And
Oh
we did this
yeah,
whole
yeah, yeah.
like older version of that, and it was like just like us staying up till like 5 a.m, just I'm just looking through the monster manual, just picking the coolest looking image and being like, you're fighting that now, and just trying to make it work. And yeah, those are the moments I cherish, and it's I guess the high that I chase, at least as a DM slash the odd time I'm a player.
Yeah, like I DM more often than not. Like one thing that my players have definitely gotten very used to, and they both love and fear it, is for me, I have a big love of cliffhangers. And usually it'll be some sort of like emotionally gut-wrenching like cliffhanger. I do it a lot. Like a lot.
Oh, interesting.
But it makes them really, really excited to, play the next session. It really is a good way to,
yeah,
incentivize them to want to plan the next session. It's not like all on me as the DM to be like, okay, guys, when are we going to play next? When are you all free? Instead, everyone's like invested in their story. And they're like, okay, but we need to know, what's in the hole, or who is this cloaked figure? Like, I need to know, why do they have, why do they have this trinket that I recognize from my childhood? Like, stuff like that.
And then we definitely have plans in the future to do a lot more where I can sit back a little more and see. And you've seen me DM a handful of times myself. You've played as a player once or twice.
Yeah, exactly.
So it'll be interesting as we both kind of learn each other's style and experience that as this whole experience grows and whatnot.
I'm fascinated though, because like you and I both really, really love DMing, but let's be real, it hasn't always been perfect. Like, I'm curious about you though, because you've been DMing a lot longer. What was your initial like experience as a DM? Your very first time, how good or bad was it?
Okay, yeah, oh wow. Trying to think back. So it would have been the same summer that I got the books. So I got a bunch of the neighborhood kids kind of into it, just, the newest thing on the block, whether it was Beyblade or marbles. The D&D was the thing that I was trying to kind of push onto the streets. And I had this weird fixation where I wanted all my friends to play different races. I didn't want people to be like double gnome or double human. Everyone had to pick something unique. And that was half the battles because people didn't want to be like gnomes and stuff. Everyone wanted to be the elf or the half elf and all the pretty things. And honestly, the first time was pretty chaotic. I mean, you imagine I'm only 14 years old. Most of my friends are around the same age. Yeah, so we gathered around for our first session. It was like 5 neighborhood kids and me. And honestly, I didn't really know what to do. So kind of like what I said earlier, I just picked like 5 cool monsters from the monster manual. I made like a little forest map. I was so ingrained that you had to draw on like graph paper and you had to draw your map. I wasn't a theater of mind guy at all when I was younger. And I just made 5 little maps and I was like, okay, room 1 is going to be a fight. Room 2 is going to be a fight. But then room 3 is going to be like, a maze or something. And then it was just kind of that. And it was actually really, really magical in a way. Because like, as I'm talking about this, it's coming back is my one brother was playing with me and he was the king of, he didn't play D&D in a traditional sense, but he really worked well to band the table together and kind of create that melding of where they forgot they were playing D&D, but it was in a very chaotic way. So the whole mission centered around them saving the mayor's daughter, a very generic mission. And my brother thought it would be a great idea to rally the table and, hey, we've saved her, now why don't we ransom her back to the town and get more money out of them? So they kind of became villains. And he always had this unique trait of rolling a 20 when it mattered. So I tried to be like, well, the guard's going to tackle you or attack you. And he'd be like, I roll a 20. And he would derail it, but in the best way possible. And it's something that, whenever I think of some of the best childhood D&D stories, it's always my brother causing chaos and all my friends giggling and laughing because they want to get in on that energy that he brought to the table. And that was what hooked me, I guess, is watching everyone smile and laugh and have a great time and build the world for me. Like suddenly they'd be asking for characters or talking to people that I didn't even visualize were in the room, but it's like, oh, I guess they are. Time to, and that I guess helped me become a better role player, is that my brother kind of embraced that because he loved to derail and be kind of argumentative with my NPCs, which forced me to have to think on my feet. So that's mine. I mean, there's a million little stories like that. I'm
oh my gosh,
but curious though, because you went from You had the opposite. I'm a DM who's almost never a player, but you started off as a player. So I'm curious on what made you decide to either take the leap. Was it forced upon you, or did you just decide you wanted that control?
It was 100% the need for control and my ego. Because, well, the group that I played with initially, like, we were very, very in love with our characters and our backstories, and that was really important to us, like, as a party. And, I will always be very appreciative of my very first dungeon master. Like, I'm so, so thankful that, like, he got us into the game and, that he gave us our very first campaign. It's just, it wasn't something that we felt we couldn't really do justice to our characters by playing with him as a dungeon master. Like, his vision for our campaign was very different than what we wanted for our characters. So we were kind of like, well, it would be nice if, we could have a little more focus on our backstories instead of like a plot hook that we didn't really feel we could do justice with our characters for. So none of us knew how to DM, but because one of my friends and I, like, we had both watched tons of Critical Role at that point. Like Matthew Mercer, like the DM for Critical Role, like had inspired such, like, I love the way that he DMs, and so he definitely has inspired me with like my DM style. Like he gave me such an inspirational boost to be like, you know what? Maybe I can DM, maybe I can run a game. I'm gonna try it. So I reached out to like all of my friends from the campaign, and I was like, guys, how would you feel about like if I were to run a campaign? I was like, okay, well, would you guys want to maybe be a part of this? So they were like, yeah, like totally. Went through like the whole thing of helping them make new characters. I learned my first hard lesson like right away about character creation, where it's okay to be limiting. Half the characters were like, oh my god, a lot of like homebrew stuff or things or like subclasses from, supplement books, and I didn't have those.
I limit people to the player's handbook because, yeah, when you start adding in supplements and books that you as a DM might not even own, it's, at least for me, it's a recipe for disaster. If I don't know how your character plays, how do you rule against things, But,
yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah.
No, cool. No, but like I decided, okay, let me at least learn their character stuff. So I have like somebody's very upset. There are kitty cats screeching at each other. But like I learned pretty early on, like, okay, let me at least get a good idea of like what their characters can do. And like we made it through. That was fine. My next hard lesson was I had created a homebrew world, and I'm pretty good with world building. It's just I was a little too rigid in what I wanted them to do, and I realized very early on in our games, I was essentially doing what our old dungeon master had done, where it was like basically just guiding us, even though half the party didn't want to do that. It's like, you have to go here, and meanwhile half the party is like, but I want to explore. And I'd be like, no. So I learned pretty early on, like, know your world, but don't be so rigid. Like, figure out ways to improvise or not be so specific about things. You go down a street, what do you see? Be broad with your descriptions, make it up as you go, get really, really good at yes and then
100%.
And then I drew up a map of not a super detailed map. I had an idea of like, what's on the west side of this town, what's to the north, what's to the east, to the south, pivotal spots. Like, okay, you want to go to the general store? There's one here and here. You want to go to the stables? Absolutely. There's only one in town. So like key places I figured out. If they wanted to go into like a random house, absolutely, make it up as you go. The internet was great because I had access to like, magic item table generators. If I'm not sure what the town is selling that day or what the general store is selling, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to go quickly get the magic store item generator.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. There's lots of magical potions here. There's some rings of protection. There's a pretty hefty cost on those, but you have the money.
Yeah, something I struggle with was which was making the world like you said there, like putting like expensive, even just something as simple as putting expensive items in a store. I would always get into this mindset of like they're in the beginner town and everything's beginner friendly, but it's like it's good to like do that, like bring some of the real world. Like, hey, they might have a artifact that's worth a crap ton of money and is a great motivation.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of like all those video games where, when you go to the town, like the very first like town of beginnings, you have like all the little level 1 baby stuff, but then there's like that one store that has everything that's, 5,000, 10,000 gold pieces, and you're
Yep.
like, one day I'll be able to afford you.
Yep.
It's like you want to be able to be like, hey, remember that place that had that really cool thing? Do you want to maybe circle back to that?
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
but no, like now I pretty much DM all the time. Like I've gotten over a lot of those hurdles. I still have some of those things that like sometimes if games are not planned accordingly, or sometimes I have like a habit of winging things. Sometimes when I wing it, I'm like, this could go either way. I think I've been fairly lucky with the number of times that I have, kind of flown by the seat of my pants, but it's like that's because a lot of the time, like when I plan a campaign, I have a lot of like overarching things that I know are happening in the world around the characters versus planning things that I want to happen to the characters. Like
Okay. Yeah.
there's an innate difference where it's like I don't plan for these things to affect the characters. They either do or they don't. But certain events within the world are like, oh, hang on, my laptop. Okay, like certain things, they're just planned. It's kind of like, how every year, every year here in like in the northern hemisphere, every August we always have the meteor shower. It's kind of like that, where there's like a pre-planned thing that's going to happen to the world. It could affect the characters, but it also
Hmm.
might not.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. I think something you said that kind of resonated with me, and I think personally it's a badge of a uh, kind of making it as a DM, I guess, in a way, is the flying off the edge of your pants. I think the thing that I do the most now, and I don't know if it's a comfortability thing or maybe it's just the type of players I have, but I went from writing pages upon pages of information to now I just jot down a couple key notes. I'm like, all right, uh,
You don't need to have like a million things. I mean, I think when starting out it definitely helps. Like certain adventure modules, I think it definitely helps, especially when you're not super confident yet with playing yes and. But like as you go on, I bet if I were to look at like my notes or your notes from past campaigns versus like whatever game we're gonna like whatever your most recent session was, the level of note taking, it's probably gone like way downhill.
oh, after a session, my players will, you have that decompression time, and my players will be like, man, that was so cool that you did this, and in my head I'm thinking, man, I just made that up like on the spot.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a good compliment though when my players think that this was some crazy thing that I planned for, and it's like, nah, I completely made that up. I just sounded cool in my head, so I said it, and it
Yeah.
worked out. Like,
And I especially love when like first of all, when you have a DM who is, so willing to like, give or do right by your players and, improvise where necessary, play that whole game of yes and. But then you have the dice that are just doing half the work for you and it's kind of magical.
oh yeah,
Like
absolutely.
sometimes sometimes it kind of sucks, when the big bad rolls a natural and crits against the weakest member of the party. Sometimes that sucks, but also like sometimes
Be a great
some
moment though.
it yeah, like it can give them a good role play moment, or maybe somebody rolls something absolutely devastating on on a table that you've asked them to roll. Maybe it's the weather, maybe it's how well they're traveling by ship. They roll ones, they roll double sixes, who knows what they roll, and it's like, great, here's your result, deal with the consequences, and then seeing what they do with it is amazing.
so they could get a taste of the power of this dragon that they were going to fight. And I completely whiffed the dragon's initiative. It ended up going last. So I had 5 people dogpiling this thing for several turns. And, well, suffice to say, there's no big bad anymore. And they were supposed to be approximately level 8, and I think they're level 5. So, but it made such a great adventure because, like, now like you said, my players are so excited to go loot the body of the dragon. It was such a cliffhanger ending, and seeing the excitement on the new players as they were like, we might be able to do this. Holy shit, like, what's going on here? Like, seeing the table come together and, like, work towards the goal. It was great. But I'm in my head going, man, what am I going to do after this? Like that was the big bad,
You're like, did my campaign just come to an early end because they all just started dogpiling my big bad? Whenever you're like improvising or doing the whole yes and, do you ever find that you like take inspiration from like pop culture or like popular forms of media?
Whatever the newest anime was at the time, all my D&D stuff revolved around that. So I've gone through the D&D Inuyasha phase, the D&D Naruto phase, the D&D Bleach phase, the D&D Kingdom Hearts phase. I've definitely gotten a little bit better at hiding it, but yeah, 100%. I just finished watching Being Human with my wife, your sister, and I have some great ideas just from a, 10-year-old show.
Oh, but also, Being Human is so great. I love it.
Oh, it was so good.
We don't talk about the last season. A lot of shows, unfortunately, their last seasons are just not worth the time. And sadly, Being Human was one of those.
Such a good premise. And I mean, I know we've talked about trying some other stuff, and I'm very excited when we finally get to try Vampire, because I've got Being Human in my mind, and now I'm just like so ready. To make that happen.
Being Human, absolutely. Like, every time I would think about reading any particular portion of Vampire the Masquerade, I'm immediately like, this is like Being Human. But anyway, the thing that I do love about like this podcast in particular is just there's so much to learn when it comes to, this is another resource for new little baby DMs who don't really know what to do, or maybe they're just looking for some guidance, or maybe you just want to know that you're not alone in all of the different ways that, DMs can succeed but also fumble. So
yeah, 100%. I view this podcast and what I hope it becomes is the person I wish I could have talked to when I was like 14, and I like would read a paragraph and not be able to comprehend it at all because it was so beyond my like ability, because I'm only 14. Like, that's what I want. I want people to join this hobby because I know how amazing it is, and I'm hey, if we can be a stepping stone for that, I think even if it's one person, I think that'll be awesome.
My gosh, yeah. I keep thinking about it, and I'm like, when I first started, I had my former DM, I had another coworker who also ran games, and then I think that was it. I think it was just the 2 guys that I had who I could like bounce ideas off of. They were like the main 2. So anytime, like, I'm so happy that I at least like had a small little network, other DMs that I could talk to, but also like all of our playstyles were so different. So I think it's just really cool when you at least have that you can learn off of other people, you can bounce ideas off. This is just yet another, resource and tool. But I'm curious though, like, if you had to think about all of like your experiences as a DM and come down to like one crucial piece of advice that maybe you wish you could give your younger self, what would it be?
And I think this will come for myself, and I give this advice to a new DM as well, is spend less time preparing and more time playing. It's going to be messy. It's going to be awkward. It's kind of like dating at first, but you'll get it. You'll find a rhythm, and it's all good. And understand that like Dungeons and Dragons is a social game, and unfortunately there are the struggles that come with social things, with people canceling and maybe players not being as committed as others are. And I just don't want, for younger me, of course, but also to new DMs, like, don't let that stop you. Don't get stuck in your head that just because one player doesn't show up, that the other 3 or 4 or 5 or 2 can't play. Like, the more you play, the more you're gonna love it, the more you're gonna get your players into it. So yeah, I mean, prepare less, play more. I guess that's the point. But what about you? What would you tell 7 years ago, Tori?
Honestly, a lot of the same points that you have, but I think for me, what I probably would have advised at the time, know your world. Like, this is why, like, I had a homebrew world that we played in whenever, like, when we started playing a different campaign with different players. Did I go back to the world I created? Heck no. We did not. I ditched that world so fast. Like, all of my campaigns now, they happen in Critical Role land. Like, luckily, right at the start of COVID, they had like their, Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which is where campaign 2 was set. But because I had watched that whole campaign, like, I knew the setting really well. Having that book, I didn't need to take notes at all. I just read the thing to kind of expand my already vast knowledge of that world. And like, now I know it pretty well, to the point that I could probably pick out cities on a map if it wasn't labeled. I know
Oh wow.
a lot of, the socioeconomics of different towns, of different areas within Wildmount. Like, I don't have to think twice about it. All you have to tell me is like, hey, if I were to go here, what would be the most important thing? If you were to point on a map and show me, like, I don't know, this one random city on the southern coast, I'd be like, well, you're in the middle of probably the most beautiful, section of this continent. It's got nature, it's got lush blue seas, one like verdant green jungle, but oh, you chose the one city that's nothing but industry and it's covered in a layer of ash.
I think one thing I could definitely take from that, and it's something because we're definitely very different stylish, because like I don't know if it's a boy girl thing or just whatever, because like I'm so used to players that just want to kill, and it's been very interesting hearing you talk about how, like, even when you were starting D&D, you and your friends, and I could be wrong, in my mind I imagine it was a lot of females, where like you guys want to play your characters and explore your backstory, and I definitely had a very different experience. But I think what I can take from what you're saying myself is like using supplemental stuff to help offload some of that brain power, where like you said, you didn't have to design the world, which it lets you be that expressive and explorative with the nittier details. Because I use the D&D starter set a lot, and that has the town of Phandalin in it, and I know, kind of like what you're saying, I know the mountains nearby, I know the forest. If you point to a house like in that town, I could probably tell you what it is. It's interesting how using something like that to just offload even 25% of the creative process can make the rest of the creative process so strong and so like enriching.
Yeah, I think it also helps too, because like I've consumed the media of, Critical Role in other ways rather than just reading their book. Like, I immersed myself in 99 episodes of campaign 2 in 9 months. So it was like I was just, living and breathing, continent of Wildmount for 9 months straight. I knew a lot about it already just from listening to their podcast version, or like watching the episodes with my friends. So like, however you immerse yourself in the world, like, it just helps if you know it, because yeah, it takes away a lot of that weight of you creating this world. That is it takes up so much brain power, it takes up so much time. If there's a way that you can offset that so that you can put your focus into other things, your storylines that you want to work out, the fun little plot hooks that you maybe want to include in your game. Honestly, if you want to put more focus into the NPCs that they encounter, like, knowing your world, however you choose to get to know it, it makes it that much more immersive, and then your game just is that much fuller. if you kind of have that bit of knowledge already preconceived, ready to go.
I think a lot of people go into it thinking it's like a video game, and I don't think that's necessarily a wrong mindset to have when you are still kind of processing what D&D is, because it's kind of hard to just explain. I feel like if you were to be like, give me your quick like 2-minute pitch, it's a lot. If I think like the things that I find enriching, for example, in video games, and is a lot of times it is games where like I can talk to the NPCs and learn their backstories and get invested. And I think there's a reason why some of those games like Mass Effect and Skyrim and Dragon Age are so popular, is because the worlds are so rich. And you know, we've kind of said like to newer DMs and even our younger selves, like steal from that, man. Steal good ideas. Steal passion. It's awesome. It's so much fun. Yeah, even if it's something as simple as giving Steve the storekeep a child, and you just make up a silly voice for their kid or something, you'd be surprised how much your players bond over that, and like that could become the most important person in their little world. And it's very fun to see how your players will spin the tiniest detail.
Yeah, exactly. Whether you give them a cool accent, or you give them some sort of emotional connect, who knows? It could be, a super hot barkeep who is maybe eyeing one of the players, and then they just decide on their own to send her a letter telling her that she has really nice eyes.
My friend, one of the few times I was a player, not a DM, act out this whole romantic letter exchange. And we had a funny house rule where our DM Logan was like, "No, we're maintaining eye contact during this. Like this is passion." It was
my God.
It was absolutely amazing, and it was like some of the best role play / like player engagement I'd ever seen. So, I mean, I feel like we have a lot that we can definitely delve into with D&D and TTRPGs in general. So I'm pretty excited for wherever this spins and goes.
Yeah, exactly. But I think we'll wrap up our first episode there. This was a super great way to get to know each other with our DM styles. I hope that you guys, to any of you who are listening, I really, really hope that you come back and check us out further. We'll be talking about a bunch of different things on our podcast, from, how to best approach session 0, how to navigate creating characters with your players, player conflict at the table, whatever problem you think you might encounter. Trust me, we've been there too, and we're more than happy to talk about all the ways we have failed and failed and failed and occasionally succeeded. Anyway, that is it for this episode, this very first episode of DM in Law. Make sure to check out new episodes every week, and we'll catch you next time.
All right, bye guys.